Awesome. Hey, I was with my wife on New Year's Eve. We were invited to a friend's house, and at the house there was people there that I didn't know, that they didn't know who I was, and so at some point in the evening, I ended up in the kitchen with another guy, and he asked a question of me that I think he probably wished he never asked. So what do you do for work? If you ever want to get out of a conversation, tell them that you're a pastor. It shuts down conversation quick. Actually, in this instance, it did not. Turns out that he is a Christian attending a different church, and so he had a lot of questions for me about this church and about church in general. One question he asked me is, why do you think people even go to church? And so there in the kitchen on New Year's Eve, we ended up having this very broad, far-reaching conversation. I said, I don't know, it seems to me like the world does a really good job of beating up on us. And I think every single human being needs a place of rest and peace and connection with the divine. We need to know that the God who created us loves us and forgives us. We need forgiveness. We need strength and peace from God. I said, also, I think that there's like habits and practices that get reinforced over and over as a part of being a church that I'm not sure the secular world teaches. And I said, I'm really glad for me because I need those moments. My wife and my children have benefited from those moments. And I think those practices and habits actually lead to a more fulfilling life and a more blessed life. Think about it. Things like gratitude and generosity and compassion and hospitality. Those are things that don't really get talked a lot about in the secular world, but they're really the centerpiece of what we talk about here, how Jesus lived them out and how we can follow his example. So I guess moral of the story is don't ever ask a pastor what they do for a living. But the reason I say all that is because we're going to do that again this month. We're going to talk about one of those habits and practices that the Bible teaches, that Life with Jesus teaches, that I'm pretty convinced is going to lead to a blessed life for you. It's a more fulfilling life. And the habit and practice we're going to talk about is resilience. And maybe that's a word that you've heard before, but never really exactly thought of the definition. So let me give you the working definition that we'll be working off of this month. Resilience is really getting back up when something gets you down. Because the reality is life is going to knock you down. Am I right? Yes, it does. Life does a really good job of that. It knocks us down. It knocks you down and it knocks me down. And resilience is, even when I get knocked down, I am going to get back up again. And just in your mind, there's an important distinction I want you to make, because a number of months ago we talked about a very similar trait called grit. And as we were laying out that month, my first thought was grit. Is that really a biblical and Christian practice? But the reality, it is. And we talked about all the people in the Bible who practice grit. So let me just quickly distinguish between resilience and grit. Grit is that kind of when you're on the right track, you kind of keep going no matter what. It's like that keep goingness that you have. Meanwhile, resilience is when you get off track, when you get knocked off track, the reality of getting back on track. Grit is about sticking with your long-term goals through effort and strength that God provides, having the grit to keep getting after it. While resilience is recovering from setbacks that completely knock you off track and helping you get back on. And the reality is, life presents many opportunities for you to practice resilience. Am I right? Life presents a lot of opportunities that knock you off track and give you the chance to get back on. Maybe you're in a work situation where you feel like you really got hosed. Someone else got a promotion that you felt was it was your time. Maybe an injury or an illness struck you or somebody that you love. Maybe you're parenting human beings that make mistakes. Or maybe you're trying to navigate having adult parents, and that's a challenge. I hear from my students, my kids, a lot who are students, the challenge of doing group work at school. And they complain about it. And I'm like, do you mean that people at your school, in your groups, don't do everything that they're supposed to do? They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, don't worry, that's never going to happen after high school. Right? But resilience is like, yeah, I'm getting knocked down. Somebody didn't do their part, but I'm going to keep going and keep getting after it. And I want to tell you why I think it's really important we do this. It's so important we do this because the temptation is always going to be to quit. There's actually a National Quitters Day coming up. Did you know there's National Quitters Day? It's always the second Friday in January. Do you know why? Because you make a resolution, you make it through the first week, make it through the first weekend, you're like, I got this. You make it through the second week, and you get to Friday and you're like, peace out. I am done with this. It's National Quitters Day. The temptation is always to quit. Let me just get a new job. Let me just get out of this relationship and get me into a new one that's going to fix everything. I tell you, I received wisdom a long time ago from somebody that I respect and admire, and they said, don't ever run from something because it will chase you. Run to something. Meaning, if you're quitting and you're running from something thinking that's going to solve your problem, the reality is that's going to go with you and kind of chase you down. The temptation is always going to be to quit. So then that begs the question, well, what does the Bible actually say about resilience? And the answer is a lot. And that's what we're going to talk about this month in January. I'm going to bring you to a story in the earthly ministry of Jesus Christ. And as you hear this story, it might be familiar to some of you. If not, that's okay. But as you hear this story, I want you to think about who is resilient in this story. And what exactly does their resilience look like? It's John chapter 11. It's a story of a friend of Jesus who died. And everyone around this person who died is trying to make sense of it and has to come to grips with it. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? What an amazing question of Jesus. Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. That is an amazing statement of faith on her part. And after she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" Jesus asked. "Come and see," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how we loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man had kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," Jesus said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been here for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." This very powerful text includes the shortest verse in the Bible. In fact, my son Luke has already claimed this to be his confirmation verse because it's so easy to memorize. Luke 11:35, Jesus wept. And there's a lot of debate about why Jesus weeps in this moment. For some, it's like he really loved Lazarus, and the fact that the reality of his death caused him to weep. Other people think that seeing the weeping of those around Mary and Martha themselves, caused a stir in Jesus' heart, and it caused him to weep. Others are in another camp, and I would put myself in that camp. And that's the camp that in this moment Jesus now knew it was time to pull Lazarus from heaven and bring him back down to earth. And that caused Jesus to weep. Imagine if you had a friend that you loved dearly and was in the bliss of heaven, and you said, "Sorry, buddy, I hope you enjoyed the few days you had there, but back down to this broken earth, you might weep too." What is it we don't know that causes Jesus to weep? Could be a little bit all of the above, but the reality is Jesus weeps. He's broken by this moment in one way or another. And he shows resilience, but he's not the only one. Think about Mary and Martha, who are broken by the death of their brother, so much so that they say to Jesus a bold statement that is either an incredibly faithful statement or a statement with a lot of implicit anger. "Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." This was breaking them. Yet by faith, they issue statements of faith that are so beautiful, and in doing so, they show such resilience. But I want to focus in today on what Jesus models for us here. Because as broken as he is in this moment, even leading him to weep, still he creates this dramatic moment, the resurrection of Lazarus. And if you think about it, this is just one example of many. Jesus models throughout his ministry resilience. Resilience is actually all over his ministry. Just think about it kind of high level with me. All the ways and all the moments Jesus has to practice resilience. Getting knocked down, getting off track, but not giving up and getting back up again. Think about it. Number one, his family thought he was crazy. Mark chapter 3, maybe you've heard this before, just 2 verses. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. Verse 21. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." So his own family, his mother, his brothers are convinced he's crazy. Second, his dear friends abandoned him. And you've heard about what they did kind of Passion Week, but well before that, in John chapter 6, just John chapter 6, verse 66, we get this. From this time on, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. This doesn't make it to too many Christian coffee mugs, bumper stickers, or confirmation verses. But the reality was, this was Jesus' reality. From very early on in his ministry, many of his closest friends turned back and no longer followed him. So his family thinks he's crazy, his friends abandon him, and then three, and probably best of all, his job literally got him killed. He was the Messiah, and what does that mean for him? It's going to mean his very life. It's mean he's going to lay down his life and die the worst death any human being can possibly endure. Yet this is what we see from Jesus. Luke chapter 9, verse 51. The turning point in Luke's gospel. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. Despite being thought of as crazy by his family, abandoned by his friends, and knowing that a death awaited, what does Jesus do? He resolutely sets his face toward Jerusalem, knowing that that's where he had to go, because that's what he had to do. Which brings me then to you and to me. The reality is this: we will get knocked down by life. It's one of Jesus' promises. In this world, you will have trouble. It's going to happen. We're going to get knocked down by life. And we are, you and me, going to be tempted to quit. We're going to want to throw in the towel. We're going to say, I can't do it anymore. I can't make it anymore. This is just too much for me. But I want you to know today what I believe to be true. Faith in Jesus Christ is a resilience secret weapon. It is your faith in Jesus Christ and mine that we can call upon when life kicks us off track. And we start to wonder, who am I and what am I really about? And we come back to the song that the band so beautifully sang for us earlier. I am who you say, Almighty God, that I am. And because that's who I am, I can get back up after getting knocked down. It is your faith in Jesus Christ that can and is, and I've seen it in you, be an anchor for your life when life knocks you off track. And I kept trying to rattle my head around, what is memorable about this? What can make this stick? And first I thought about the song that you all know. Ready? I get knocked down. Right? And I thought, let's just sing that song. I said, no, that's so played. Let's do something different. So I said, we got to have a visual for this. So this is going to be our visual for the whole month of January. Are you ready? This is going to be our visual reminder for what we're talking about in January. Now, imagine two things. Putting this together in my kitchen with a bunch of kids around saying, Dad, what are you doing? And a cat who is saying, Dad, what are you doing? All right. But of course, you know kind of what this does, which is the beauty is no matter how hard and in what direction we get walloped by life, we get back, right? And this is what faith does. And sometimes we don't know where it's coming from. And sometimes things happen to you and happen to me that we never expect to happen. Then they knock us down. And we feel like we don't make it anymore. We can't make it anymore. We don't want to make it anymore. That's when we rely on our faith in Jesus Christ like never before. So this is going to be our visual for this month. And we're going to see people who model this for us in the Bible and how we can draw strength and courage from them. I want to leave you with one final quote. Somebody shared this quote with me. I had never heard it nor seen it before, and I have been kind of obsessed with it since. It's a St. Francis of Assisi quote: "Wear the world as a loose garment, which touches in a few places, and there lightly. I don't know what you take from that quote. And to me, it's such a work of art. I don't even want to talk about what I take from it because I don't want to spoil what you take from it. But to me, it's like, don't get so bothered by what's said about you or done to you or happening around you that you get so tight and wound. But instead, it's, man, what if we all, because of our faith in Jesus Christ, wore the world and its events like a loose garment? Amen? Amen. Looking forward to this journey that we'll be on together this month of January. Hey, in a few moments, we'll turn our